Thanks, Daphne. Well, I will also welcome all of you for attending today. Thank you so much for your time and attention. As always, we are very excited to have you here today. As Daphne said, my name is Kate Hightshoe. I am facilitating part 3 in our series, A Seat at the Table, cultural conversations about equity in the arts. That's a mouthful, but one that has a lot of value for all of us on the call today. So we're quite excited and appreciative to have the very unique opportunity to share the space with all of you. Um, Stephen, I'm going to see if you have any opening remarks that you would like to make for our audience this
Yeah,
morning.
thank you. Yeah, very short. Thank you, Kate. Thank you to all of our panelists today for their time and talent. We really, really appreciate you and for contributing to the conversation today. And special thanks, of course, to you, Kate, for your passionate and your just intentional leadership with this series. And thanks to all of you. Thanks to everybody for attending today and for your commitment to inclusion in our community and specifically to the inclusion of arts in our community. So thank you, Kate.
Awesome. All right. So I know I see some familiar faces in the audience today. Thank you for tuning in again, but there are some new faces as well. So it may be worthwhile just to give a little brief overview and summary about how A Seat at the Table came to life. Um, so briefly, I would say a little over 3 years ago, Stephen approached me and wanted to discuss diversity, equity, inclusion in regard to the Des Moines Arts Festival. And one thing I love about Stephen and Daphne and the festival is that he really was incredibly open and transparent with the journey the Arts Festival had been on and the direction that he wanted to go. And one of the things she shared with me was just that the Arts Festival at different times had received some criticism from our community about um, requests of digging in deeper to diversity, equity, inclusion in the art space. And I just, think it's important to say that DEI has been part of the Arts Festival's vision and strategic plan for a number of years. And although sometimes due to timing, things can seem reactionary, but this is something that Stephen has had his eye on and knows is a very important area of focus for the community for quite some time. And so we discussed about different ways that we could possibly elevate these conversations. And given the fact that we had pandemic and a number of other challenges to work with, one of the key goals was to make sure that this messaging and this conversation could be accessible and that all people feel welcome. One of the most important things that we wanted to accomplish was to create a space where everyone could feel like they were safe, like their opinions could be heard, people could feel like they could bring their authentic selves to this conversation without being judged or without feeling as though they're on the outside of the conversation. And so, therefore, A Seat at the Table was born, and here we are today. One of the things that we're going to discuss today, of course, today's event is in celebration of API Month, Asian Pacific Islander Month, or APA Month, Asian Pacific American Month, or Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, or AAPI, or and so as I go on with all of the various things that you could call this month, we, the panel and the Arts Festival, want to really set up front that we believe we are whole people. And so, although this conversation today is really in celebration of API folks and those communities, um, it's really important that we recognize that we are all far greater than a couple of demographic assignments, than a monolithic scenario of who we are as people. Asian woman. I deserve more than that to describe who I am. White male. Stephen is certainly more than a white male. And so, as we talk with you today, one of the things we wanted to level set up front is that although, again, this is in celebration of API month, it's important that we let you know that we believe we are whole people and we're all far more dynamic and far more complex, far more diverse than assigning a demographic category to each one of us. And in fact, we believe that this is part of the barrier that continues to impact all of us moving the needle forward. Because as long as we continue to talk about people in simple boxes of race, gender, sexual orientation, political affiliation, whatever those divisions are, number one, we're going to run out of months. Okay, there are only 12 months in the year. So, we've got to stop just creating this laundry list of divisive categories that continue to keep us separate. They continue to shine a spotlight on how we're so different. And yes, certain issues and differences deserve to be elevated and celebrated and dug into. But at the same time, I think there is much more to celebrate if we can appreciate, respect differences, and find those intersectionalities. So that was a really long-winded introduction, but I do think it was very important to at least set that up front because Asian Pacific Island is such a box and we are actually so broad that it seems silly to even in some regards say that term. But without further ado, because I know that really you came today to listen to our amazing panelists, we'll go ahead and get started. Um, all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a number of themes that you're probably hearing in the media today that continue to pop up and sort of bubble up to the surface. These are not new terms, but they are starting to come alive again. And we, again, are seeing more of it in the media because of certain situations that have been happening in our world, and they continue to be topics of conversation. And the first thing I'd really like to dig into is the idea of a positive negative stereotype. And I think that when you really think about API folks, positive negative stereotypes are one of those things that are often discussed in accordance with the Asian Pacific Islander communities of people. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, a positive negative stereotype is, well, Christine, you're good at math, right? Because you're Asian. Or Kate, you must play the violin because you're Asian. I'm sure Clarence here has been asked if he plays the violin or piano 100 times when in a matter of fact, he is a clarinetist. So these are positive, negative stereotypes, all right? And on one hand, a person might say, well, those aren't so bad, but what's wrong with them? That it's nothing disparaging, which is why they're positive, negative. But the issue with this is that it takes away any hard work, commitment, resilience, or energy that any of us put into our craft every day. What it says is that we didn't work hard. We're just good at this because we're Asian. And so what it does is it strips away a layer of who we are and what makes us who we are. So Clarence, I'd like to start with you. If you would be willing to introduce yourself to everyone, tell us who you are, what you do, and then a little bit about how the positive negative stereotype has had an impact in your musical career and what that looks like for you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Kate and Stephen, for inviting me to be here this morning. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I'm Clarence Padilla. I'm a 100% Filipino is my ethnicity. But I was born and raised in California. And so you can tell I don't have any kind of accent. I can't speak the language. I can only barely understand one dialect of the Filipino language. It's called Ilocano. But born and raised in California, did all my schooling in California. And then 1993, I came to Des Moines to teach at Drake. So I've been a professor at Drake for the last, in the music department for the last 28 years. I've been playing with the Des Moines Symphony as a clarinetist since 2000, so I've just completed my 21st year there. And I'm also the personnel manager for the Des Moines Symphony. I spend a lot of my time performing. Clarinet is my primary instrument, but I also play saxophone. So I also play for a lot of the Broadway shows that come to town in a normal year, anyhow, for the Des Moines Performing Arts. And then a couple of years ago, I became the contractor for Des Moines Performing Arts, in that I hire all of the musicians whenever a show needs local musicians. I'm the person who hires musicians to play in the orchestra pit for a lot of the shows that come to town. So I'm really lucky very fortunate to do what I do. When people ask what it is that I do for a living, I say I play the clarinet, and most people then say, well, but what do you do for a living? And I say, well, I do play the clarinet, and I teach the clarinet, so I'm really lucky. But in terms of positive, negative stereotypes, obviously I am Asian Pacific Islander, and so there is an inherent perception that I have, quote, talent in the area of the performing arts. And I'd like to think that my success in this area is because of my hard work and my work ethic. I'm lucky in a way in that in the performing arts, everything is really based on what you do when the time comes to perform. So I'm lucky in that respect, in that when I practice on my own. When I rehearse with the orchestra, I have to make sure that I'm meeting expectations of the people around me, the conductor, whoever I am working for at the moment. But there are many people that I have run into that believe that I have some sort of inherent talent associated with what I do, but that's not necessarily true. Kate is exactly right. A lot of people, when I tell them I'm a professional musician, they do think I do play the piano or the violin. I'm going to be very honest with you. I can't play the piano or the violin at all. Short story: when I had to do my piano proficiency for my bachelor's degree, one of the things we had to do was play a few bars of the Star Spangled Banner, and I think I still hold the record at Long Beach State for the longest version of that particular exam. So it took me a little while to finish it. So, but again, my work ethic is really what I'm proud of. In terms of the Des Moines Symphony and any orchestra in the country or in the world, something that you may not know is that your acceptance into a symphony orchestra is based on a blind audition. So obviously I was not hired because of my ethnicity or anything like that. Everything was behind the screen. And so I had to audition just like everybody else behind a large wall, and that's how I was able to be admitted to the Des Moines Symphony.
Wonderful. Thank you, Clarence, for sharing that. I love that story. And that's one thing I really appreciate about the symphony is, they have been quite innovative about how to hold fair auditions, or auditions that are more fair or more equitable, right? And, they're not perfect, but the symphonies have been doing this now for a number of years. And actually, there's some really great data and information out there about so they had data points prior to the blind auditions and how many folks were selected that were male versus female, and different sort of demographic segments. And then once they started having blind auditions, and a lot of those numbers of historically underrepresented groups of folks did start to increase in numbers and continue to increase. So I love that story. Yes, we've all been asked if we play the violin, definitely Suzuki violin at that. But I appreciate you sharing your background and a little bit about that with us. Christine, why don't you introduce yourself? And I think you will have some really interesting viewpoints to contribute to this topic about positive and negative stereotypes and how it's impacted you and the work you do in Art Force Iowa and the young folks that you work with every day.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kate. And thanks, Clarence, for sharing your story. I think it's always a tremendous gift when anyone can come to any table as their authentic self. So thank you for sharing that. I'm Christine Herr. I'm Executive Director of Art Force Iowa. Art Force is a local nonprofit that serves youth, and what's really cool about us is we work in the intersection of art and social justice. um, I think being a Des Moines native myself and knowing my own history of how I got here and why I'm here is the reason why I continue to stay here, even though there are days where I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Why am I still in Des Moines, Iowa, when there aren't a lot of artists who look like me, who have similar lived experiences as me? I need encouragement and support from people who look like me. And then I remind myself, like, girl, you're here because you need to build that. Because there are babies that you work with who look like you, who need that community. So I think of my history and I think of what it means to be a Hmong American and how my parents came as refugees in the late 70s. And my dad's journey brought him straight to Des Moines because of former Governor Bob Ray, who answered a call and said, Southeast Asians, these refugees can come and find a home in the state of Iowa. I grew up with parents who were very, very typical Asian parents who were strict and were very like, do not do art. Don't do it. What are you doing? Go be a doctor, be a lawyer, become a pharmacist. And the rebel in me was like, I'm gonna play music and I don't care what you say. And so in the middle of the night at 14, I would practice guitar while my mom and dad were sleeping, like quietly playing. And I think that resistance of wanting to be an artist is just a true core of being an artist, right? That act of rebellion that says, I'm going to be who I want to be. And I'm going to make the art that I want to make. But knowing that my history is rooted in resistance as well, just reminds me of resilience and grit that each of us do have and where we come from. And I know when I think of Southeast Asians and API folks in general, we're here in America because of resistance, because of saying, I'm not going to assimilate. I am going to be a proud Hmong person, but I can also be a proud American and I can also be an artist. And what does that mean to do all of those things? I know, what Clarence said and what Kate had said, I had those same stereotypes. Oh, Christine Herr works really hard. And, she went to Drake and she's just working really hard and she does the work. So we want to support that kind of work. And I think that's really great. But it's also harmful because I think of young people that I serve who are Southeast Asian refugees. They're not doing well in school and they're not widely known as artists either. And so when you think about, these stereotypes of Asians being, hard workers and the ones who keep their head down and just continue to grind, that can also be really toxic because rest and joy is necessary to having a meaningful life. It's necessary to being an artist as well, right? And so if you have this stereotype that is good because you work hard, I think there's some of us like me who is like, man, if I want to rest, that means I'm not working hard enough. And if I want to be a good artist, I have to continue to grind.
So, Christine, a question I have for you is, There is a data point out there that I recently saw where it says that a very large percentage of Asian American or API students in elementary and high school um, are given less attention by teachers.
Yep.
Because of that positive negative stereotype that we're just great students and we're smart and we don't need help and we work hard, and our parents at home, the tiger parents, will make sure we do our work at home. Can you talk to me just a little bit about how you see that impacting, creativity in our youth and what that does to people over time, just based on some of your interactions?
Absolutely. I think what's really harmful is that art is a luxury and it shouldn't be, right? The access to art supplies, that's really difficult for families. Growing up, my mom and dad did not want us to make art, not only because they didn't have the means to get the art for us, but they didn't see the value and the importance of it. So if you don't see value in the arts, then you're not going to put any money or investment into it. And sadly, that's what happens with a lot of our youth. And it's not even the whole picture, right? If young people, like the ones that we're serving, don't even have the funds for basic needs, art is definitely not going to be one of the things that they're going to put on that list when they go shopping, right? Because they don't have shoes. And I think what's really difficult is, you have young people who are in desperate need of creative expression, and then families who don't understand or don't value the arts because they're just trying to survive, and that there's a big gap between that, right? And oftentimes the only people who young people can go to are in school. And what hurts more is that we're not recognizing or having those conversations about our own bias, that when there's a kid in school and his name is Kwakwa, the teacher doesn't call on his name because they're ashamed they're going to say this kid's name wrong. And since they're thinking, oh, this kid, he's Asian, so he's going to pick this up quickly. He's asking a question and he doesn't know what's going on, but you're not going to call on him. So now he's going to not do well in school. Right. And it's sad because the statistics show us there's data that says Southeast Asians are not doing well in school. And a lot of people forget that Asia is huge.
Huge. Yes.
Huge. Right. So East Asians are doing really great in school. Southeast Asians are not. We're failing. We're the ones who are not graduating high school. Hmong Americans are, I think, one of the least, at the very bottom of not graduating school at all. And so I just, I think of how harmful these stereotypes can be. And in those moments of how helpful they can be as well, that we can lean into saying, I am a hard worker and I did get here because of my hard work. But for those of us who need extra support because we don't have our basic needs met, or we have teachers who won't call on us, or we have community members who, don't want to talk to us because they have their own bias, it's hurtful and it's harmful. And our kids are the ones who have to deal with what's going on, right? And sadly, the adults and the parents might not understand or know the culture, don't know the language. So it's really hard when that gap is so wide. Art is not one of the things that kids, families think about when they're just in survival mode.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And thank you so much for giving us, a really great look at a number of different dynamics, especially from a youth perspective of how that can be both hurtful, but at different times, there are positives that people lean into as well. So it's not black and white, right? And, with that being said, one of the comments you made is that Asia is huge. And a lot of people do not know, surprisingly, that Indians are Asian. And with that, I am so delighted to be able to introduce to all of you Pragnya. And Pragnya, if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and about your art, and then a little bit about how the positive negative stereotype assigned to Asians has affected you either similarly or maybe different because you are from India and not everyone realizes that you are also Asian. So we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate, and thanks for having me over here. It is wonderful to hear Clarence's interesting stories. And my name is Pragnya Yogesh. I come from southern part of India, from a place called Karnataka, which is known for its beautiful sculptures, temples, and of course the food and music. So I came to Des Moines about 15 years ago for my husband's job initially. So when I came here, it was just all about excitement, looking around the places and learning about the different things here. But when I came to know that I'm going to be here for a longer time and not just like as a visitor, I started to explore. Being graduate in masters and, doing my masters and all that, I would have chosen to be working, at a corporate, sitting down and, doing a 8-hour daily routine job. But what suddenly flashed to me was, I think, culture or art does matter. It's because you're coming all the way from a different place where you need to accept a lot of new things. The way you look is different. The way you speak the same language, the dialect is different. So I was just wondering on those aspects, and I think that one thing made me to choose dance as a medium, because I feel, dance is one of the powerful medium of communication that we've been actually using from a lot of generations, that storytelling is one of the medium. But I feel storytelling in the form of dance is the strongest medium that I can I can communicate with people and get the connection built. So wherein I use music to introduce my ideas and experiences and tell stories about cultures, legacies to the children's. So because I feel unless we tell and speak about the different cultures and traditions all over the world to the kids, because I think it is the right set of audience to reach out in order to have that stereotype removed at the later age, because it's very hard unless you reach out to the people and express and tell about your culture, your experiences, and how you can be different, and even being different to see the similarities and encourage each other. So it's quite a, as some of you have already experienced, it's quite challenging task. So I chose dance, and with that, I have actually, working on with the kids and people around Des Moines. I'm a artistic director of Ishanjali Dance Academy, which imparts Indian classical dances, both classical folk dances and also the Bollywood type of dances. I also work as a cultural ambassador for a non-profit organization called Cultural, where I reach out to schools and corporates, spreading the art of Indian dances and try to bring out the similarities that they all know. For example, as Kate was saying, as an Asian, everybody think, oh, you're very good at math, like that. So when I hear those comments, I feel, you see, yes, you're right, we are good at math. But do you know how hard it is to use that math in dance? So I try to bring in that, that connection and link whatever they feel, okay, you're only good at that. But you see, it needs a lot of hard work to kind of, you have to bring out that variety, even though the people think, okay, you're just good in this, Asians are good in that and this. So I think it's time sometimes to bring out the variety in whatever the people already have in their mindset, unless you bring in that change in them, bringing out showing them the different things of the same aspect. It is hard for them to come out of that stereotype. So one of my experience was like, there was this very big event happening in the town, wherein they were encouraging only, like, for example, when it comes to dance, because I'm mostly into dance, so I'm talking about that. It was a dance event wherein all the major types of dances around here are well known, were being invited to perform. and I got an invitation to just come and watch. I'm like, why not perform just to watch? And then they were like, I'm not sure how people would accept, seeing a different art form right here when people are coming to watch what they always want to watch. I'm like, I think it's a time for a change, wherein unless you give that, open up to the people and say, this is what we have. Why don't you see the different types of cultures? Because, for example, imagine for a moment the world without any art or culture or any music or dance or any kind of poetry or anything. It would just be so dull, isn't it? So I feel we have to open that mind of the audience, and unless a person takes that initiative to learn what other culture or art is and then show it to the audience or people, I don't think we are able to reach them, right? So I was able to show them some of the video clippings, talk to them over what is this about, and also show them the similarity of art. When you keep studying each art or forms of art, it can be dance, music, or anything, you will find a similarity. It's not that everything is unique, and I understand that it's a uniqueness, but also a connectivity. So I think if one person can identify that connecting piece between different arts, I think it'll be more reachable to people and acceptance will be better. So yeah, that's about me, and I'm here now sharing all the different types of dances to people and telling stories in the form of dance, where we use expressions and finger movements to convey the stories and not verbal mostly. So I think it's quite interesting for people to just understand a story or a culture or any kind of the kind of experience that the person is sharing through dance, through expression. So that's nice that at times it's very overwhelming welcome that I get from the people around here, praising the dance movements, the stories that I convey. The simple stories can be conveyed in expressions, but at times, as I mentioned, we have to kind of work and find our ways to kind of reach out for people. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, Pragnya, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think there are different stereotypes amongst the API group, depending on whether you're Pakistani. I think that there are very distinctive sort of positive, negative stereotypes, or just stereotypes or biases in general towards different segments of Asians, which is why I say, there are only 12 months in a year. If we could get away from continuing to create these boxes, because we're so much diverse than that. But I think that some of the stereotypes, especially when you think of positive, negative stereotypes that people have assigned Indians versus, say, the Chinese versus, say, the Hmong versus Filipino, they're all quite different. And I think, the structures in society that create these stereotypes also then use those stereotypes to create sort of myths or storylines, right, to support different notions. And so, Christine, I would love for you to share with the audience. I think you do a really great job of sort of articulating how this works. If you will share with us a little bit about your perception of the notion of the API folks being assigned the tag of the model minority, and how do API folks how is it hurtful to us, but how do we also at times play into that? Yes, it is a problem, but at times we are part of the problem. And you and I have talked about that. And so I'd love to hear from you and have you share with the audience kind of your perspective on the model minority when it comes to API folks.
Absolutely. When I think about the lived experiences that so many Black, Indigenous people of color go through, even though the experiences are unique and different, they're also similar, right? But the difference between API and Black Americans and Indigenous folks and Latinx folks is that for us, API people, we're the model minority, meaning we're the ones that most people refer to as, well, they got their shit together. They're smart. They're making money. They're hustling. They don't need a lot of support like all these other people because they're doing it. They work hard. And though it is true that API folks work hard and we are smart and we care about our communities, it is hurtful because we're not represented as a minority group when we are a community full of different people from Asia who have been and continue to be minoritized and marginalized and not part of the table, right? I think of the stat that just came out. Only 42% of Americans can name an Asian American, a prominent Asian American, right? That's a really big statistic that says, man, people, less than half of people can name a famous Asian person. Why is that? And I think of the stats that Daniel Day Kim shared that said, hey, how come API folks aren't included in data when it comes to things like voting or just data in general? API people aren't included in those statistics. And the person said to him, oh, it's because API folks are statistically insignificant. Sit with that. Because that means API voices are not significant. That our voices, our art, who we are, is insignificant. And that is why our numbers aren't part of the data. So when you look at people of color, it's Black Americans and it's Latin folks, and that's it. And I think the model minority myth that says Asian people keep their heads down is the reason why we're not included in things, right? Because we don't want to shake shit up. Because API people want to, and there's some of us who are like me, who are really loud and take up a lot of space and say, I'm going to rock the boat. Because you know what? Someone has to do it because this is hurting us. And it's not just hurting API folks. It's hurting every single one of us. It's hurting all of our experiences and connections to each other when we choose to stay silent and not make noise about what is not okay. And I think about, us being artists, right? And if we continue to do what we're doing, that means our stories aren't going to be shared. Our stories aren't going to be told, whether that story is told through dance or through music or through film or through photography. If API folks continue to stay aligned with this model minority by working hard and keeping our head down and not making any noise, we think it's going to help us, but it's really not going to, because that's why only 42% of Americans can name a famous Asian person.
Christine, I think that's a really good point to make. And one of the things that I really see this model minority thing doing is that what it does is it puts API folks in a position to be the bad guy,
right,
in the eyes of other minorities.
Right.
And it puts us in a tough spot because, how do you raise your hand to complain to the structures that have given you sort of a preferred status,
Right.
and say, we didn't ask for that. And in fact, it not only hurts us because it holds us to a standard that sets unrealistic expectations for an entire race of people, but it's used to also finger point at other historically underrepresented groups and say, there is no racism. Look
Right.
at Asians.
Right.
They're not having problems starting businesses and going to Harvard and Yale. So it's a really tricky spot to be in. And I think it impacts all of us in different ways. And I also think that this model minority myth is kind of the initial roots to the idea of the bamboo ceiling. And so, Clarence, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the bamboo ceiling and ask you, you teach at Drake, you're a part of the symphony. What does that mean to you? And has there ever been a time where, you felt as though you weren't sure if you could speak out or have a voice due to some of these stereotypes? Or have you ever felt as though, there was a stopping point in your career just simply because of some of these stereotypes and myths? Or are you someone who says, I'm not paying attention to any of this, I do me? And how did you overcome that?
Well, I think you're right on when you say I do me. Raised in California, um, I never, believe it or not, I never considered myself a quote minority until I moved to Iowa, because in California I looked like the majority of the population, and then when I moved to Iowa, then it was different. And so when you go to well so I, when in terms of the performing arts, again, I'm going to say that my success in the performing arts is based on how I perform at a given moment. And so I pride myself on being able to meet those expectations uh, when I need to do that. So I work very hard at it. The Filipino culture, um, the conversation certainly initiated some good memories, but the Filipino culture is a reserved culture in my opinion, in that we never want to rock the boat. I remember my parents always saying, "Yeah, we're going to kind of stay quiet in this, or we're not going to stir things up in any way." But as I get older, I think some of those perceptions do change, and 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 I'm now proud of my heritage, and now I've become when I moved to Iowa, I've been tapped to be a officer in the National Association of Filipino Americans for the state of Iowa, and I'm proud to serve on that agency's behalf, because I'm not trying to be arrogant, but I made it as a Filipino American. And so I'm proud to share my story with all of you. I'm proud to share my story with Filipino youths, in that you can make it here based solely on your merits and on your hard work. I always look back at my parents, because they left the Philippine Islands 50, 60 years ago, and came to this country for a better life. And I'm a result of that decision. And I can't imagine my parents getting on a boat or getting on a plane and coming to America, not knowing where they were going to live, not knowing what they were going to do, but they wanted to create something for their family. And I'm a direct result of that. So I'm very, very proud of the older I get, it's very interesting. It's the more proud I am of who I am and where I came from.
Wonderful. Thank you, Clarence. Pragnya, I'm curious to know from you, has there ever been a time, so you've been in the United States for 15 years, is that correct? About 15 years.
That's right.
Yeah. So within those 15 years, have you ever experienced a time when you felt as though you had a goal that you wanted to achieve with your dance or within that art and performing art space, and that you felt as though there was a ceiling, a stopping point that society placed on you that said, you know what, for an Asian person, we feel like you've gone far enough and we don't think you should go any further. And have you ever felt as though there were terms and conditions or limitations put on how successful you could be because you're Indian? And if so, what did you do to overcome that?
Yeah, actually, as Clarence was saying, when he landed up in Iowa, he felt as a minority. So I was just thinking about that line. So exactly, that's how I felt like when I moved here to Des Moines. As Kate said, 15 years ago, I moved here, and I'm like, where did I land? With nobody around me who's looking like me, because, well, things have changed in these 15 years. We see a lot of Indians here now, but when I came, it was very hard, to kind of settle into this setup here, because it's a few things are very different. Because one thing is the weather. That's very challenging. It's never this cold or does not snow back in India. So being a dancer, no, you cannot stay, in the colder area for a longer time, because you need to keep moving your arms and feet for a longer time, right? So it's not a good choice. And then so once I came to know, no, Iowa is a place where I can explore more. We decided to stay here, and venture into too many other things. Like unless you explore yourself to find your place, it's very hard. So the one thing that I felt was there are many occasions where I felt, okay, I think I can reach even more further and be a part of that. But then I'm still looking for options. Like I'm happy that I see a lot of organizations have come forward in bringing all these cultures, different cultures together, and give it in front of the audience. Like there are organizations like Bravo and then Cultural. They're doing a very nice job in helping people like us to be what we are and exhibit our cultures and talents to people, and find a ways to be a fit in this environment. So with that help, I think most of them are getting aware about the different cultures, the different dances, the music and art around us. And that's one thing which has been helping me to reach my goals of being a part of prestigious events. So I think the challenge was very initial years, but I think with all the hard work that I've been doing, and also exploring the opportunities wherever I get a chance to exchange our dance or culture, I'm right there to exchange and convey or tell people about that dance and things more. And also, I think one way I'm also trying to bring the awareness is that teaching my own kids the culture and the art and the dance, so that because they are the first generation Iowans, they're born and brought up here, and it's sometimes challenging to balance the culture, like they're like, Mom, why do you want to talk that language when we are always here in this country, and why do you want to speak the native language? I said, no, I think it's always good to be in touch with your your culture and traditions, and be proud of it. It's quite challenging. So I'm trying to balance it with my kids and teach them. And I've been successful in making them present their talents. Like my boys do Indian vocal, they speak the Indian language, the Indian drums. They go exchange their art and music at schools and other events, and they're like, all the kids are like, oh wow, this is something unique. We have never come across. So I think unless you find a ways to where you can spread out your culture and talent, people won't invite you to come and, share that. So I think I'm finding these small channels wherein I can reach out to people and, raise and bring out the different cultures that are around us in the town. So yeah, that's one thing. I'm fortunate that Des Moines is now opening up to all these kind of opportunities and acceptance. So it's wonderful to see that more platforms are available for artists around here. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Christine, I want to come back to you because I feel like, we've kind of circled around, and I think that probably some of the young folks that you work with are struggling with some of the topics that Clarence and Pragna have, as adults, right? Um, have seen themselves grow, but you work with a lot of young folks who may not have the power of insightfulness or of reflection to say, you know what, I'm proud of who I am today, or to say, things are really changing. I can see the future moving forward. They may not have that vision or that perspective. So, if you can share with us in your perception, what things continue to contribute, specifically in the art space, to the bamboo ceiling? And is it imaginary? Are we as API folks, did we help create it? How do we help take it down? And I mean, is it real or is it imagined? So I'd love to hear from you some of your thoughts about that.
Yeah. Wow. I need to digest that last part because I have a lot to say. Surprisingly, the young people we serve, and just to let everyone know, at Art Force, we serve young people who are involved in juvenile court or family court. That's its own mess, but historically, the young people that we serve tend to not be European descent kids. And then we serve young people who identify as refugee immigrants and first-gen Americans like myself and Clarence and Pragnya's kids. So a lot of our kids are youth of color, and they're proud to be who they are. I think it's adults, right? And it's the outside pressures that make us feel a little bit ashamed to be who we are. But these young people, they know who they are. And I'm like, damn, you know who you are and you're proud of who you are. So how can I amplify that? How can I continue to empower you? Because those exterior forces, like going to school, like playing at a public park and having police officer look at you and say, you need to go home, you're causing trouble, those exterior forces make them ashamed. So I think of myself and so many of our artist mentors that we train, our jobs is to continue to create a space where these young people can feel proud to be who they are, that they're not going to get what are you wearing? Why are you wearing that? That's weird. You smell weird. They're not going to get that shit at Art Force, right? And so when we train adults, whether it's juvenile court officers or teachers or social workers or artists, we say, look, this is our approach. It's healing-centered engagement. We're going to recognize the role racism, especially systemic racism and personal bias plays in how we interact with people. And that cannot happen at Art Force Iowa, because this has to be a place where those exterior forces, it's not harming our young people. So young people they're so proud. I mean, they make art in response to their pride in being who they are. There's a lot of things right now, terrible things happening in Myanmar, and 80% of our youth are refugees from Myanmar. They're Karen. It spells like Karen, but it's pronounced Karen. And all of their art that they made this year for our exhibit was about what was going on in Myanmar.
Christine, tell people where that is and give us a little background, because I think people would find it interesting, and I think a lot of folks probably don't know.
Yeah, so Myanmar was formerly known as Burma, and it sits just west of Thailand and Laos, so Southeast Asia. And Myanmar has and is known, maybe not known, a lot of people don't know this, so I should rephrase that. Myanmar has the longest civil war known to the world, and it's ongoing now. So ethnic cleansing of different minority groups within the country. And that is why so many of these ethnic groups have come to America, because their genocide and civil war continues to exist in their home country. And so many of the young people we serve have never stepped foot in their home country. They were born in a Thailand refugee camp and then displaced there and then displaced again here. And they're proud of who they are. So, you know, when I think about why do we grow up and we want to shy away from who we are, and then we come to recognize like, wow, where I come from is beautiful, is more because of the outside pressures of saying, hey, whiteness is better. And you have to adhere to whiteness. I mean, my mom and dad did not give me a Hmong name. They gave me a white name. They gave me a European name because they said, girl, we don't want anyone to have a trouble saying your name. And when you look at my name, Christine Her, you don't think Asian, right? And I remember going to job interviews and people looking at me being like, oh, you're Christine. You sounded so white on the phone. And I'm like, well, I was born in America, so I hope my English is good, right? And I think of how Asian people, and not just Asian people, people in general, it is easier to sit in comfort. It is easier to be complicit because it doesn't require much from you, especially when you have comfort. And I think with that model minority and the bamboo ceiling, we probably did play a role in creating that because we thought it would benefit us. And we didn't understand how it would harm us and how it would harm other communities of color. And I think there are moments where we play into it, whether it's through, you know, good intentions or not. And it's sometimes where, you know, when we're brave enough to be courageous and say, hell no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to step on other Asian people to show that Hmong people are better. I'm not going to do that. That takes a lot of courage, right? And so I think dismantling the bamboo ceiling along with the model minority myth is that as people who identify as Asians and Pacific Islanders, we have to do our job. And I think of myself, it's a privilege to be college educated as a Hmong American, as a first-gen American. And it is a privilege to be an executive director. It's a privilege to be able to move and navigate this world and use this title of executive director and Hmong American together, that it is my responsibility to not only dismantle what has been created, but to call others in through courage and kindness and say, look, I don't want to call your ass out, but I do want to call you in because this can't continue. It's killing us. And it's not just killing API people, and it's not just harming other communities of color. It's harming our friends who are European descents too. We've all been harmed by these systems. And until we can come together and acknowledge, wow, we're all harmed, we can't change it, right? So I do think when you are someone, whether you come from a community who has been marginalized or minoritized, if you have power and privilege, it comes with responsibility.
Absolutely.
And you have to be able to use it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the important things, you know, so we often hear in today's world the talk about privilege and what that means. And, you know, oftentimes people throw around the term white privilege. And, you know, one thing I really want to say here, and Clarence, I'm going to come to you next. I think it's important that all people recognize their own privilege. And that includes API folks, that includes me. If I were to sit here in front of all of you and say, I don't have privilege simply because I'm not white, that would be the biggest misstatement, lie, I mean, we all have privilege. And, You know, I love that you talked about it's not just being executive director, it's not just being Hmong American. It's when you combine the two, the capability of that is really incredible. Same thing, you know, South Korean woman, I'm adopted. I'm freezing, I think, on the screen, but that's okay. But like, if I bring everything together, the point of privilege now that I have, it has to be acknowledged because we cannot move forward until we acknowledge our own privilege and say, hey, I do have power. I am more than Asian American. I am so much more than API. I deserve more than 1 month out of the year to celebrate my heritage and background. And you know, Clarence, I would be interested to hear from you when it comes to being a musician in the Des Moines Symphony. And you know, you're from California. Your parents are Filipino, and they took some big risks, you know, to come to this country. Um, you are now in a really interesting position yourself, where you know I'm super proud uh, to know you. Like I had no idea. So I've known Clarence for a number of years. Had no idea he was the man and had all these amazing opportunities. So I mean, share with me though, like in the eyes of many, you've broken the bamboo ceiling, right? It didn't even in according to what I hear you saying is you refused to believe that one existed for you. And because of that, you have risen above any of those sort of assignments that people want to place on different categories of people. So, talk to us a little bit about what that looks like every day for you. How do you explain to others how your now point of privilege to uplift or to educate others in the space that you are in every day?
Well, yes and no. You know, the perception of an American is still a person from European descent, and so when you are when we talk about immigrants, we're talking about people that came from European descent, and then but people with Asian backgrounds are considered foreigners. Why is that? We're in 2021, and I've been on this earth for a number of years, and it's been that way for as long as I can remember. And so the question I have I done anything? Have I done anything? And is there more that I can do? I'm very disheartened by the acts of violence that has been happening in the last 3 or 4 months. Why is that? It's only because of the way these people look, and people are carrying out acts of violence among people just for the way they look and just because they have an Asian descent or ethnicity. So maybe I have, as an individual, cracked the bamboo ceiling, but at the same time, there's so much more to do. There is so much more to do on behalf of who we are. Americans are all of us, but until we can all look at each other and accept each other for how we look and for where we are from, and not categorize it as someone of European descent, then this will always be a struggle.
You know, Clarence, I agree with you 100%. And Pragnya, I'm going to come to you in just a minute. But one other comment or question I have for you, Clarence, is this. One thing I've always noticed in classical music is that while a lot of the musicians that play this music tend to be Asian, or at least that's one of the stereotypes, is that Asians are good at classical music. Okay, but how about the number of masterworks or compositions that are performed by these musicians on any given concert, anywhere?
Right.
What do you have to say about sort of the disparity there between the stereotype that Asians are great musicians, but why are we only practitioners of the art? Why can't we be seen as creators of that art? What do you think about that notion?
Well, we obviously have to be inclusive of everyone, and you're absolutely right. You if we go to a major Los Angeles or Chicago and you look at that orchestra, you're going to see probably 3/4 of the musicians probably Asian descent. Yet they are probably playing the music of Beethoven or Brahms or Tchaikovsky, again, of European descent. Now, this is one of the bright spots in the last 5 years or so, in that musical organizations are diversifying themselves and opening themselves to performing the music, in my case, the performance of music of diverse composers and artists. And that's really what it should be. But it's really interesting in that this initiative is being driven not by the administrators of these orchestras, but it's being initiated by the musicians themselves, which is really great to see. So out of the internal activity, out of the internal conversation, now that we are starting to be more inclusive of composers with diverse backgrounds, which is great to see. I've never seen this in my 30 or 40 years of being a professional musician. So this is wonderful to see.
Great, thank you for sharing. And I love that you talked about the idea of the eternal, forever immigrant status that we as Asians have. And I'm gonna give, I'm gonna give a little background, and then, like I said, Pragnya, I'm gonna come to you first about this. So I cannot tell you the countless number of times that people really want for me to be a foreigner. And, I've learned to be okay with that to some degree. Certainly getting angry doesn't necessarily change perception at all. I am one to try to use humor in how I help people to understand and to help them see sort of their blind spots when it comes to this. But, I can't tell you how many times I've introduced myself to somebody and they say, "Oh my gosh, your English is so good. You hardly have any accent at all." And I go, interesting. I didn't know that Iowans had an accent. But like this is perplexing to me every time it happens, because it's a bias. That's the only way it can be explained. If you heard my voice without seeing my face, you wouldn't think I had an accent. But when you see me, I cannot tell you how many times I've had somebody go, "Wow, your English is so good." And I make jokes, I'm like, "Well, yeah, I did get A's in English in kindergarten. But never mind that, right?" Or the other thing that I get a lot is, so my name is Kate Hightshoe, and I think all of you can see the spelling there. If people don't see the spelling, you'd be surprised at how many people will write my name KATEHI-CHU or HY-SHOO. They want so badly to make it Asian, right? Like they just, Haichu couldn't possibly be German. because I'm adopted, there's no way Hightshoe could be German. And people always want to say, if I say my name's Kate, what's your real name? What's your real name? We'd like to, I'm like, my real name is Kate. Seriously. No, seriously, my parents named me that. You know, so these are some examples of that sort of eternal foreign or immigrant myth that plays out in many of our lives all the time. And Clarence and I laughed and chuckled about this because, you know, he shared with me that people say that to him as well, like, wow, Clarence, your English is really awesome. And he's like, thank you, so is yours. And so, you know, we all learn how to interact in a way that, you know, hopefully shines a light on some of these things. Without being hostile, without trying to lead with anger. It's hard not to sometimes, but I do believe that in order to have a captive audience, you can't alienate them. So these are just some of the ways in which I deal with that. Pragnya, would you talk about some of the experiences you've had either through teaching dance or in the arts community that you work with, or even just in the Des Moines community, but that deal with that sort of myth of being an eternal immigrant, things people might have said to you or things you've experienced and how you've been able to deal with those?
Yeah, first of all, actually, my name is Pragnya, and I'm not pretty sure that everybody is easy, you know, it's easy for everybody to pronounce that. So very first thing is they're like, okay, this name sounds a little different. So I wondered what this person has inside her to share. So it always begins from my name. It's like, okay, what does it usually, you know, our Indians have a meaning related for the, you know, it has, all the names have meaning to it. So I would always start with that, because unless the person really knows your name and where are you from or what are the things that you are going to share, it's not that it won't be that reachable to that person. So the thing is, the first thing they ask when I say, you know, especially if they see me, obviously they can understand that yes, or can relate that yes, I am from India. But if I'm on a phone call or something, then I say, okay, this is Pragnya, and then it takes forever to kind of explain the things. But then I see that once we kind of explain to them, okay, this is how it is pronounced and this is what it means, I think it's quite acceptable for them. And then they start listening more about our stories. So that's one challenge I have always been, you know, then they start asking me sometimes when I go to different workshops, so where are you from? I said, I live here in Des Moines, and I'm from Des Moines. Like, no, where actually are you from? You know, those kind of questions. It's especially, I remember an instance where one of my kid, he said, he was asked by somebody saying that, no, so where are you from? I said, no, I'm born and brought up here, is what he said. And he's saying, no, where actually your parents are from, because that's always, you know, that makes them different. So those are the things that have come across my life. So, and with the dances, like as unlike the music, wherein most of the music, you know, you have to play with, you know, all the productions and all the stuff. We have in dance, we have the liberty to write our own story, that to inspire, and we can also include the music or that is required for the emotions that you want to convey. So that freedom we have. So I think that's why I said in the beginning that's dance is the strongest communication that I chose to share my stories, because I think sometimes just words will not hit the person's mind, you know, like we have to bring some kind of exposure to that person wherein that really strikes and tells that person, yes, you need to accept the other cultures and this is what it is, and see the beauty in that. And so that's one thing I would like to share. And I think we are lacking the role of a role models here, like in the sense, like we need a person where that person can kind of aspire or provide the opportunities for people to look into other things and bring out the similarities and also stand for one another, in order to see the cultural differences, or also bringing the unique togetherness and all that stuff. So I think we need people to open up their minds. So unless you start sharing that, that's what I always like to share. Again, all of these through dance. I think that's one thing where one of the solution I can say for all these bamboo ceilings or stereotypes and all that. I think that perspective will always remain in people, but we have to try our best to keep on sharing our experiences and also our stories, so that one fine day, I think people would really understand, yes, this change is required in order to live in this place. So that's one thing I would like to share about that.
Thank you. I think you bring up a lot of really good points there, with just the fact that regardless of what stereotype or what issue we're talking about, art in and of itself is a space that we can have some of these expanded conversations. And I believe that we're able to see things so much more clearly when we relate things back to art. Because, for example, Clarence, when he plays the clarinet, of course, the clarinet in and of itself is a beautiful instrument and it sounds amazing. But when it is a part of the incredible diversity of the symphony, it is transformed into, the evolution at that point is so incredible. And so again, we have no problem seeing dynamic and layers and complexity when it comes to art. We understand it. We understand it when we talk about in terms of a symphony. We understand it when we talk about in terms of dance, or in terms of even, painters. From the distance it looks one way, right? But when you get close, there are layers and textures and colors and all kinds of different brush strokes, and that's diversity. And it creates a better whole. We can understand those things in art. And for some reason, we as people have such a hard time understanding that when we're relating to other people. And Christine, I know that you and I also talked about sort of that perception of being an eternal immigrant and foreigner. How do you think that has impacted or shaped you? And how has it shaped the direction you've taken in terms of being the executive director for Art Force Iowa? What has that really meant to your work, or has it meant anything at all to you?
Yeah, I mean, it has certainly impacted me. I think I love what Clarence and Pragnya said when they said, I felt out of place when I came to Iowa. I didn't feel that anywhere else, right? And I think about how I grew up here. It's exactly how I felt. Since the day came out of my mom, right? As fast as a bullet. She always tells me, Christine, you came out so fast, you hit the pubic bone and you were black and blue. Because I just had this zest for life to be quick and loud and take up space. And it impacted me in a way where I knew I was different. And I was looked at that way, but then like what we had talked about, some moments of being Asian was good for me, and in some moments it wasn't, right? And I think about how music in all of those moments of good or bad, because I'm a musician, I'm a singer, songwriter, I went to school for creative writing. I think now if my parents were into the arts, I probably would have been really great in theater, because I'm very dramatic. But I think, you know, music and art was the one thing that allowed me to explore who I was as a Hmong American and who I am as a woman, and who I am just as a person who is living and breathing a walking intersection. That's what I call human beings, right? We're not just one thing. We're so many things. That Venn diagram, that's us. We're in the middle, and that's all of us, right? And I think, you know, we can understand the diversity of a symphony or the diversity of a play or a painting or a dance and how we need all these different contributions. But I think what makes it hard for us is that we don't understand each other because our lived experiences are so different. And there's a lot of fear and a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of misinformation that makes it difficult for us to really come together and say, wow, we need each other. And that's what makes living so beautiful, is that we all have different experiences. And some of us have been, you know, who benefit from the system, and some of us don't. But if we come together and we say, wow, we need to change that, we can have collective change where we can all benefit, right? And I do believe art is the best medium. I don't know, and I don't care what art you want to say is the best, but I do believe that art in itself, in all of its forms, it will always bring us back home. The arts always brings us back home, and it always brings us back to each other in ways that other things cannot do. And we're consuming art every day, right? And I think when we consume art, and we're consuming art that is made by communities who are marginalized and minoritized, we can understand their lived experiences. And until that happens, this symphony of humans is going to be difficult, right? Going back to what Clarence said, you're going to hear folks who are API playing in the symphony, but they're not playing music made by people who look like them. They're playing music made by someone who died hundreds of years ago, who European descent. And I think that also matters, right? So when we're thinking about what kind of art we're consuming, we got to think about who's creating that art, and are we consuming that art? Because when we start to consume art made by other people, whether it's, you know, clearly on race or LGBTQ or religion, who you choose to love, all of those things, we can actually start to understand people, right? Because storytelling comes in the form of all art. And that is the power and the key of recognizing art and these lived experiences. Like, that's the intersection. And it's so easy because it's so easy for people to consume it. And I just, you know, I'm working on a big project right now that is all about storytelling through the mediums of art, and how these stories are going to be stories shared by communities who come from these communities that are marginalized and minoritized, because oftentimes our stories aren't told. So you can't look at me and say, wow, Christine Hurt is a first gen American with refugee parents, because what you see is she's just Asian, and I'm going to go back to the model minority myth, and that's all I'm going to think about. But when you get to know me and you get to know my story, then you can be like, wow, I'm not going to think of that because Christine Hurt sucks at math and she can't do Kung Fu. What? Okay, so Asian people are not what I think, you know, and it's not just Asian people, but now it's each other. And we can say, oh my gosh, I thought that these group of people were prudes. And you know what? They love drinking, and they love making love, and they love joy. Okay, I thought of them one way. And now through this storytelling, whether it's dance or this music or this theater projection, you know, like all of this, I can better understand this person now as a whole person. And I think that's important, that we are the authentic teller of our own stories, and that people consume our art, because that's the only way we can better understand each other. It can't be other people telling our stories anymore.
That was beautiful. I agree. You know, we have to be the driver
Yes.
of our own journey, right? We have to be the ones willing to get in that front seat and drive forward And like you said, create our own stories. We have to stop letting everyone else draw or write that story for us. Because what happens is Asians, API folks, we continue to get put into this place that's similar to like limbo, right? We're right in the middle. We're neither good nor bad. We are used to demonize some while uplifting others. And that switches depending on the set of circumstances and who it serves best at any given time. But the more we take ownership of our own stories, of our own destiny, right, in terms of our place in the world and how we paint that picture, the more those stories become real and they become authentic. And so as we wrap up today, again, this really leads back to what I started with, is that, while this event today is in celebration of API month, there are so many countries that make up this broad category. But we're whole people. And we all believe here today at a seat in the table that part of the problem is the way we continue to have these conversations and the words that we use to describe people. Again, there are not enough months in the year to continue to creating little tiny boxes for different groups of human beings. Whole people come to the table as more than a race and a gender and a sexual orientation. We are more than that. We are more than a grocery list that we need to check off going down a list. We're complex. We're complex human beings. And to continue to describe each other, to continue to tell stories from, again, a monolithic standpoint that paints all of us as really unidimensional human beings. We're like a print. We're like a print versus a painting. We are a melodic line versus a symphony score, right? And so, again, these conversations are so important to have. We're very grateful for all of you that took the time to be with us. We know that time is one of the most precious gifts you have to give. So we are very grateful for your time and attention today, and especially to Stephen and to Daphne for allowing and helping to create this space for us to continue to have these meaningful conversations about cultural equity in the arts. As we go forward today, again, please know that we are very grateful to have you here. And the last minute we have, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen and see if you have any final words or messages for our audience today.
I don't know that I could add anything to what's been shared here today. I'm just so grateful to you all. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your journeys. Thank you for sharing your stories. Really, truly a lot to think about. I took lots of notes. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Daphne, would you like to share with the audience when to tune in next?
Sure. We will have our fourth seat at the table session in the middle of August. I'll be sending out additional information as we get that planned and on the calendar. But this session will be on our YouTube channel, and I'll send out a follow-up email as well. So if you'd like to share or rewatch some of the conversation, you are more than welcome to.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you
great
all.
afternoon, everyone.